right. Well, thank you all for joining us, those in studio and those online. We appreciate you so much. And we look at the reports of the listeners, the hits, and we are encouraged and glad that you have joined us. Tonight is a continuation of the Lordship of Jesus Christ. The Communion Supper is our subject tonight. If you're keeping track of the numbers, this is lesson number 35 in the series, and I have no clue when we're going to stop. We're going to go till we're finished.
Jesus comes.
Well, so we'll see. We'll see how that works. What's the meaning of the Communion Supper? We're all familiar with it, I'm sure, those that have been involved in structured church services, or those that have visited, or those that haven't been to church. You know about the Communion Supper and what it means. Jesus is seeking a close and binding relationship with you that is based upon love. It's entirely upon love. It's not based upon performance. And He's the first to love. We can't explain first love. It just doesn't make any sense to us at all. That God would love us while we were yet sinners. Christ died for us. Makes no good common sense whatsoever. But His heart is a heart of love, and He died for us. And hopefully and expectantly, that would develop into mutual love. That we would love Him back. That we would love Him and appreciate what He has done to us and for us, and is preparing for our future. All the drama, I'll call it, of ceremony and religious activity sometimes impresses us. The beauty, the circumstance, the music, the artwork, but it doesn't impress Him at all. He looks for things that are deeper than just the visual and the superficial. But before He left this earth, He gave us a gift, and He gave us a reminder. This supper, this communion supper, is an observance that brings to our fresh remembrance of two momentous events, and with it, their meaning, their significance. Religious things are sometimes baffling to people because they don't know what it means. And once you understand the meaning, then the sheer symbolism kind of takes on a lesser role, or at least it should. But the first thing that He wants to jog our memory about is the meaning of His death. That's the first part. The second part is similar but connected to it, and that is the promise of His return to the earth. So we've got His death, His sacrificial death, and then His second coming, that are the reminders that are embedded within this particular observance. There are those who sometimes misunderstand or mistreat what we call the Lord's Supper, and that's another name for it that's used in some churches. They approach with a casual attitude sometimes. Sometimes I've seen even people bored. As pastor, for a few years, I've administered the elements, sometimes directly to the people, sometimes to elders that then act as ushers. And it seems like if you were a mind reader, they don't actually say it, but there's an impression, on the facial expression, the attitude. Here we go again. We just did this a week ago. We just did this a month ago. We just did this a year ago. Same old thing. Here we go again. Well, it's sad, but for those few folks, seems like their primary concern is that Sunday morning service is going to be 12 minutes longer than it needs to be. And they're checking their watches, and they're checking their phone, and they're, how do we get out of here gracefully? How do we end this? And they're completely distracted by their own priority of time wasted rather than paying attention to the meaning, even the repetition that we choose to use within this observance. Some view the observance as having mystical or sometimes even magical qualities and powers, and that's believing that if you participate in the elements of communion, this will clean up and resolve every issue between you and God and the problems in your relationship. This isn't first aid that becomes a panacea to just clear up everything that needs to be cleared up, and I won't go into further detail in that, but the elements don't have magic. They are a representative of something else that is wonderful and special and unusual. In Matthew chapter 26, in the verses 17 through 19, we see the Passover supper is prepared. There is some background. There is some advanced prep needed for this to even occur. We see in this gospel record that Jesus observed all the feasts of Israel during his ministry. John is one of those. Luke is one of those that tracks Jesus' movements. And he's always in Jerusalem at the time of the feast and when the Jews would gather. In this case, it's Passover. It's Passover week. It is this feast and this celebration that is the memorial supper to commemorate the deliverance of the children of Israel from the Egyptian bondage, and combined with that, in response and obedience specifically to the preparation for the 10th plague that God had told Moses was coming next. You see, for the majority of the plagues, they affected the Egyptians, and the Israelites were not touched. But on the 10th plague, this one's going to be widespread. This is going to be the death of the firstborn, man and beast. Man and beast. And nobody's going to be immune from this unless you follow the instructions of Moses that God had given to him, and that turns into this Passover observance. So on the first Passover, and of course it's drawn from the movement of the death angel that saw the blood and passed over. And so there's a depth of meaning that literally would have touched every family were it not for their obedience and faith. This deliverance was accomplished by the sacrifice of the lamb and the public display of the blood of the lamb on the doorpost and the lintel. It is very significant that the blood was to be displayed on the outside of the door, not on the inside. The participants of the family within the house, they knew what was going on. They were fully aware of the observance, but the marking on the outside of the home was a testimony to the public, to those that saw it. Maybe they didn't agree, maybe they didn't participate, maybe they were mystified, but they knew something special was going on there, something different. There's a marking on that house, and there is I'll call it a silent testimony that we all give with the showing forth on the outside of your life that you're marked, that there's something special. And that's not in a derogatory fashion at all, that there is something special about your house and your household, your family, and your testimony to the world. In Exodus chapter 12, which I think is one of our collective favorite chapters of what happened. Historically, there's a major turning point in Exodus 12. It records the history-making events that mirror and parallel our spiritual experience. Very much so. You see, we today are delivered from the bondage to sin and brought into true freedom through Jesus Christ, the blood of the Lamb. The bondage is real. The representation and symbolism of Egypt as a land of sin is real. Our removal and our being spared our lives by the blood of the Lamb being significant and being shown, and then the deliverance begins. And that's the first step. And so this is a huge turn of historical events and spiritual events that we personally identify with. In this particular passage in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus has plans to observe the Passover feast, the Seder, it's called, for the last time. Now, if the disciples had been listening, and Matthew records a majority of what Jesus gave as a warning for what was going to happen, and you know, they had the same problem that we do at times, that we hear what we want to hear, and we don't hear what we don't want to hear. Anybody out there except me and the few that are here? The disciples didn't want to hear about Jesus, his death, and anything in the future that they would regard as something negative. They didn't want to talk about that. They didn't want to hear it. Jesus told them plainly. There's many passages, mainly in Matthew, that Jesus is trying to tell the 12 what's going to happen next. But this is the last Passover observance in the New Testament that I can find. Now, I'm sure it happened, but I'm talking about making mention that it's not noted in the New Testament that anybody kept the Passover feast again. Now, there are those today, and there's a mixture of practices, and I think many of them are fully acceptable. There are those that practice the Passover feast as much as symbolically possible, except for the killing of the lamb. All the other elements are participated in. And there are those Christian churches that observe Passover as as they could, and maybe they should, if they're convicted, if they put meaning to that and preach it as part of the gospel. It's great. There are others that ignore it and only serve the communion, and I understand that position. Even if they serve it every day, I understand. Then there are those that I'll say blend them together, especially during Passover week, and they will administer the communion elements during the observance of the Passover feast. And there's a transition and a blending together. So there's a lot of different ways to celebrate this and to make this observance. The one exception to the statement that Paul gives to the Corinthians, he encourages them in chapter 5, verse 8, keep the feast. Now, the way he describes keeping the feast is completely different. There's a different texture, there's a different emphasis, there is a different way in which the feast is kept, but he encourages this congregation to keep the feast and not discard it, and not just throw it away. So the depth of that and how it's observed, I hope you can understand some leeway in what different people do in different ways. The preparation of this feast included the securing of the room. There's a particular room. Now for the rest of the families of Israel, of course, it's the home. But Jesus and the disciples did not have a home. They didn't own a building. They didn't have a home that was theirs in any kind of a communal way. They traveled about the land, and they taught and they preached, and miracles were performed. So now they need a room for Jesus and the disciples to use. And there are those, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but there are those that choose to believe that they secured a room that later became what we know as the upper room from Acts chapter 2. And that's kind of a nice thought. If it were the same room, it'd be kind of neat. I'm not sure. I don't know that there's any historical or scriptural support for that idea, but it's a nice thought. It's a nice thought. But they secured a room that they would then use. There would also be the ceremonial cleaning of the room. You see, you can bring in the housekeepers and you can bring in the mops and the brooms, but then you've got to have somebody that has a position or probably authority to remove all of the leaven, symbolizing the presence of sin. They did this throughout the Old Testament days, and Mom would clean the house, getting ready for this event, but she'd leave in the corner just a little bit of dirt. And Dad would come in with the feather, and he would inspect the whole house, and aha, he would find the dirt in the corner, and he would take the feather and he would scoop it up and now declare the room is leaven-free, and we can have this wonderful Passover feast with the family. The lamb has to be roasted. There's a lamb that's procured. There's a lamb that's then butchered, if you will, if you don't mind me using that language, and then roasted. The matzah bread had to be baked. You can't just do this all in the last 5 minutes. There's some preparation that has to be executed. They had to obtain the bitter herbs. There was a special wine they used for this particular observance, and all of the different elements that would come together at the meal. There was also, there's just a lot of preparation. A lot of preparation that someone has to make. The disciples seemed to be the ones responsible, and Jesus directed them. And in Matthew 26:17, the disciples are well aware. Their background is Orthodox Jewish. Even the ones that were different in their politics or their religious practices, they were fully aware of all of the Orthodox practices concerning the Passover supper and all of the elements that needed to be prepared. However, they did ask Jesus for the specific direction of their activities, how to get it prepared, when to get it prepared, and maybe some assignments that were very specific, so that everything would be ready when that time came. So as we stay in Matthew chapter 26, verses 20 through 25, we move forward. The Passover supper is observed. Now that all the preparation has come to its fruition, this is one of the most colorful and significant feasts that Israel observed in all the calendar of the many festivals and feasts that existed. They would introduce the 4 cups of wine, 4 different cups, and they had names, they had purposes. The 3rd cup was smaller in size than the other 3, and the proper order had to be observed, of course, the dipping of the bitter herbs in the special wine, the unleavened bread, the eating of the lamb, the singing of what is called the Great Hallel. It's taken from the book of Psalms, specifically from Psalm 118. It's not the whole psalm. If you're familiar with 118, it's very long, but there are portions of 118 that are used as the hymn at the conclusion of the dinner. Each of these steps, and I want you to just kind of put this on the back burner for a minute, each of these steps is either done or overseen by the head of the family. The family is all going to be involved in it, but it's the head of the family that actually performs this. It's not a visiting evangelist. It's not a minister from down the street. It's not the pastor that comes in. The head of each family, the man, performs all these things that need to be done in the proper sequence and with the proper emphasis and prayer and words that were a blessing for the elements. Jesus took this occasion, and it should be of no surprise that he took the role of the head of the household. He's in charge of this. This is not just something that's passed over to another person. Jesus himself chose this time to make a famous and special announcement. He had made references to the disciples in past time concerning his future betrayal and his death, but now he announces, he steps it up a level. He announces that the one who would be the traitor is in the room. Boy, that got their attention. That really got their attention. I think it was so quiet in that room at that moment, because this wasn't just cast into the future of sometime, somewhere this is going to happen. It's happening now in the room where we are. Contrary to a great deal of popular opinion and the interpretation of the well-known painting of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, none of the disciples knew the identity of the betrayer. Now, Da Vinci, and I'm assuming that most or all of you have seen that famous painting. It's historically not very accurate. It's not the kind of tables they used. They didn't eat in that fashion. All the disciples are in a row, which is unusual. But then there's one over to the right, and you can pick him out. Da Vinci painted him very specifically. There's kind of a dark cloud over his face. He has dark hair and a dark beard, and he has this swarthy looking mustache and goatee, and he doesn't look happy. He looks sullen, and there's just a cloud on this one man. And then, of course, Da Vinci has painted that inadvertently the elbow has knocked over the salt shaker. Now, in medieval times, salt had some kind of mystical significance, and if you spilled the salt, it was either bad luck, which the Bible doesn't support that concept whatsoever, or an admission of guilt. And so next to the elbow of the betrayer is a salt shaker that's tipped over, and there's some salt spilled out on the table. Very subtle, but very real and very significant. It's as if everybody in the room knew who the betrayer was, according to the artist. And so that's why I'm calling it, and I'm not trying to be real heavy about this. I find it a little bit amusing because Da Vinci, being a devout Roman Catholic, put his spin and his take on the scene in the room, including the goatee. This man in the photo, not the photograph, but the painting, doesn't look trustworthy at all. You wouldn't trust this guy, as they say, as far as you could throw him. Matthew 26:22 records this statement that changes everything and just kind of erases everything Da Vinci implied within his painting. Every one of them, Matthew records. Every one of them, all 12, asked this question: is it I? Sometimes when we're challenged, we wonder, I wonder who he's talking about. And you look around to see, does everybody know it's me? Every one of them. And I'm just going to say it's possible that each disciple asked in turn, rather than a group response. I just want to project to you the possibility that they could have asked in a row, going around the circle. There was nobody chuckling. There was nobody laughing. There was a possibility that I could be the one. I could be the one. And so they asked, is it I? And we go around the room or table, and we finally come to the last one. Is it I? The treasurer of the group, the most trusted disciple, is the one who handles the money bag. If he is as untrustworthy as Da Vinci paints him, you wouldn't trust the treasury of the whole group. The common bag for the income and the expenses of this traveling party. This man was trusted. This man was amazing before this moment. And so it comes to him, and in verse 25, maybe he's the last one to ask the question. Is it I? And Jesus responds to him with, you're the one. Now, that's a paraphrase. But Jesus responds affirmatively. Yes, it's you. Well, everybody's in shock or recovering from some shock. Can you imagine a collective sigh going, oh, I'm glad it was somebody else and not me. I'm glad that something else, oh my. Jesus confronts this man with his unthinkable yet planned sin of betrayal. Is it unthinkable? We would suspect Judas last. Maybe unstable Peter might be the primary suspect, because we don't know what he's going to say next or what he's going to do next. This guy's, foot and mouth disease, at a major level, and he is impulsive. He's headstrong. He says things that he can't do, or certainly is highly improbable. But Peter is open to revelation. It was to him that the Father revealed the identity of the Son, and he spoke it forth. He preached that sermon, that classic, on the day of Pentecost, when he's still on probation because of his mouth, because of what he said about Jesus, because of his wanting to separate himself and not identify with Jesus, just close enough to watch, but not close enough to be identified. It's the same guy. Well, I'm not after Peter, and I don't think he entertained this. But Jesus confronts Judas. What could have motivated him to this act? What's the motivation? I don't think it's the money. That's just my personal opinion. I don't have any scripture for that other than he threw the money back at some point to those that gave it to him. I don't think there's enough money. I think there's something else happening. This is a man, you see, Judas is the Greek form of his name. The Hebrew form of his name is Judah. Judah, which means praise unto Jehovah. Now, when he was born, names meant something. It reflected the character and the demeanor of the belief of the parents and what the future of the child would be. Praise unto Jehovah. Think of being called Judah by your first name. And yet today, I don't know anybody that's named their child Judas. Nobody. There's some Jews that are named Judah, and a few Gentiles, but not very many. Somehow he really ruined that name. He was obviously intelligent. He's obviously entrusted with finances, the money for the group of the disciples, and it's just possible, that he thought he might be the Messiah. He's pretty special. He's pretty sharp. His family is amazing. It's just possible that there's a little crack in the wall there, and pride comes in. And the ego is fed, and here's the phrase I like to use: when ego is fed, the head swells and the brain shrinks. Somehow you lose your mind when you get drunk on egotism. Good sense and logic go out the window because you're all drunk on reading your own press releases. And oh, don't some people love to do that? To read in the paper, in the magazine, in the fashion trade journals, what they say about me, my performance, and how wonderful I am, and then not remembering it's your publicist that wrote that and gave it to the magazine. That's what you told them you were, and very selective about the facts. It's possible that he would be the Messiah, and then some shattering of that pride when this Jesus of Nazareth kind of sabotaged his dreams. I'm just saying it's possible. I don't have scripture for it, but I'm fishing in a black hole for some reason for the betrayal that's not money. Maybe his hopes and dreams are ruined because Jesus got popular. Maybe he thought, this will pass. They'll see that he's not really the one, and eventually the spotlight will turn to me. Could he have been jealous? Boy, I'm telling you, that's a major force, much bigger than 30 pieces of silver in that value. Jealousy and egotism combined gets ugly, really ugly, without exception, and that's tragic for all of us. Jesus points out to Judas, look at what a horrible thing you're going to do. Look at this. You're going to betray the Son of Man for what? And so it's not a condemning, it's a reflection upon the facts. He offers, maybe Jesus offers his friendship anew and afresh to this man. Maybe it's possible that Jesus could change Judas' mind, that he would recant, that he would repent, that he would stand down, that he would cancel his deal with the Sanhedrin, that he would not go through with what he had chosen to do. In verses 26 through 30, we're still in chapter 26 of Matthew. The Passover supper is superseded. Superseded. Really. Let me give you just a few of the known accusations against the Christians of the first century. These Christians, they said, are barbaric and cannibalistic. Really? Well, just listen to the doctrinal statement they would give you concerning their communion observance. They talk about flesh. They talk about blood. Some say they're even using flesh and blood in their bizarre ceremony. There are those in later centuries that then accuse them, and this is coming from the followers of Muhammad, that they were using the body and blood of newborn babies. And of course, it crosses that religious line between the early Christians and the early Muslims. Those Christians, by the nature of their language, are just, wow. Others in those early days created what I think is a truly bizarre doctrine. Truly bizarre, off the chart, called transubstantiation. It's practiced by the largest church in the world today. It's the belief that as you in the communion, as you take the bread and the wine, that it literally, as it comes into your mouth, literally is transformed into the blood and body of Jesus Christ. Literally. It's flesh and blood. I'll tell you what, it didn't exist at the time, at least they didn't want to see it. A quick look at a very simple Koine Greek dictionary would have taken care of this one, for the word that is used in this passage is means represents. And that's what Jesus said. This represents my body and my blood. Where they have changed is and built this crazy doctrine on the word is. The definition of the word is, if you remember that famous problem. What is? What it is. Is it, does it mean literal? Does it mean the transformation occurs? You see, somehow it wouldn't have been possible for the literal blood and body of Christ to have been used at this ceremony. He's still alive. He hasn't bled yet. And yet the fallacy of this doctrine is still practiced and believed and held as proof you're a Christian by one church. If you don't believe this, you're not really a true believer. This is sad, but it's intentional. This isn't a little mistake. This is intentional, and when proven different, they go with what they believed for centuries and not the revealed truth whatsoever. They don't want to hear about it. Another charge against the early Christians was that their belief and practice separated and caused hatred in church and in family groups. It broke up families, and that was a major charge. You'll remember that Jesus addressed that, and he said, I came to divide. I came with a sword. I came, and they went, what? Surely you know, this is an 80-20 kind of an issue. You can't be against breaking up families. There are many questions and many concerns that are discussed about the communion supper. Some are more legitimate than others, and some are just, I think, nonsensical and meant to distract from the real meaning and function. Should we always use real wine? I've been in countries where real wine is used, quite a few in fact, and boy, they're in adherence to that. Even in countries where there's an extremely high rate of alcoholism, they still serve real wine at church because it's true to the tradition. Should we use the juice of freshly squeezed grapes? There's some that get off on that, where, you know, that prevents the alcoholic content from being fermented and put in there. Must the bread be unleavened? Tell you, I shocked one church. I said, you know, the communion is in the spirit. And the particular physical elements that we use really are representative, and they don't carry with it power and meaning in and of themselves. And everybody's with me until I said, you know, we could have communion today with Ritz crackers and root beer. And one lady just about fell out. I'm telling you. That's, oh my goodness. Oh my, how terrible a thought that is. Ritz crackers, what? You use what you have because it represents something. It isn't something inherently holy that has to be this particular thing. How do we forbid unworthy people from participating? That's a problem in Corinth, because they knew there were people living in open sin in their relationships, and they continued to take the communion elements, and we got to stop that. And Paul taught them the proper way to approach it, and that is examine yourself. Quit looking across the aisle and making a judgment about another person on what you heard on Facebook or in a rumor or in the gossip station somewhere. My goodness. Examine yourself, he said. Examine yourself. And there's other teaching there, of course. Is participating in communion optional for a believer? Well, that's tricky territory, let me assure you, because there are believers, pastors, that are in prison that don't have a choice. My projection, do they practice communion in prison? I think they do. Where'd they get the wine? They don't have any. Where'd they get the unleavened bread? They don't have any. What do? They participate in the Spirit. And the elements kind of drop off the table for significance. If you're dependent upon the purity of the wine, the alcohol content level is not too high, and the bread has to be unleavened and baked in a certain way in a certain oven by a certain lady, you're missing it. You're getting distracted by the process and not the purpose. The purpose is something in the Spirit between us. Is it optional? I don't think it's optional, but I don't think you have to bind people to the elements in the physical. How often should we observe the Lord's Supper? Boy, that's a hot potato that nobody wants to really defend. And I know people that take communion at some venue, whether it's at church or their private Bible study or whatever, every day. Every morning, they take communion. Now, to just say, well, they have a formal church background and a mainline denomination influence in there. If they feel like they need to do that, what's the objection? My objection would be if they came in and said, Mark, you've got to do this because I believe I should do it. There we cross the line. How often should we do it? Jesus didn't say. He said as often as you do it. But our Western brain kicks in and we got to have a timeline. We got to have a frequency mandate. Is it every month? Is it the first Sunday of every month? Is it twice a month? Is it on Sunday or Wednesday? He didn't say that. He says as often as you do it. You want to do it more often than somebody else? It's okay. If you want to do it less often, it's okay. That's not the point. The purpose of the supper is to observe and to celebrate. We observe his death and his second coming, and we celebrate both of them for different reasons. The intention is to bring us together in the Spirit with Jesus Christ and with one another as members of his body, the church. And whatever route we choose to get there, that's the point. This is a mission. You can't let the particulars of the physical things negate the goal of the mission. It's to have communion in spirit between Jesus and his body, the members of the church. Some have related this, and this is kind of a cross-cultural thing that doesn't apply in every place, to the engagement ring. In some cultures, including the American, it's traditional to ask in marriage, the hand of marriage, the man asks the woman, and then as a token of that commitment, an engagement ring is given. And usually it's nice. Not always. Sometimes it's small, sometimes. But think of it, an engagement ring this way. It's the sacrifice of the love of the one who gave himself. And then, of course, the engagement gives you the picture of the coming event. There's going to be a wedding. There's going to be a time when the groom is united with the bride. And the importance of the engagement pretty much diminishes at that point, doesn't it? Because now we're going to celebrate the wedding. There's going to be a wedding feast. There's going to be a union of Christ and his bride, the church. And the ring signifies there's something coming. Has he expressed his love, his devotion, his commitment? Absolutely. Absolutely. And the church has responded with, I'm in. I commit to you. I commit my life to you. This is not a trial time. This is not a maybe under the Jewish customs. You're committed. Betrothal, and we usually connect that to Joseph and Mary. Betrothal is a lifelong commitment, as if they were married, but they're not quite married yet. They're not quite married yet. In the light of his great sacrifice for you and I, how is your love for him today? Check the engagement ring. Check the promise of the coming wedding. Included in the final hymn of the Passover feast, there are a couple of portions that are, I think, very significant above the others. Portions of Psalm 118. Included in this, and you think of the significance of Jesus singing this passage at this particular time when he knows what's going to happen tomorrow, tonight and tomorrow. When he sings, "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." Wow. If you knew what Jesus knew, and it was tonight and tomorrow for you to have these things, these horrific things, happen in your life, could you sing, "This is the day the Lord has made"? I will rejoice, and I will be glad in this day and whatever this day holds. The Hallel concludes with this statement, however, "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever." Oh, give thanks unto the Lord. And in the Passover observance, in the communion observance, we can easily sing, "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord for his provision of salvation and deliverance for me, for you, for the family, for those that are there to celebrate this wonderful observance with us." I want to mention the Jewish Orthodox tradition. This will be my final point of comment for today. Within the Orthodox Jews, there was a practice that only family members could join together at the Passover table that were blood kin of the head of the family. You had to be connected by blood to this family to come to the Passover table. There's a term for it. It's called table fellowship. It's a tradition, and they practiced it faithfully, and they defended it pretty strongly. Pretty strongly. This is not something that they bent the rules for certain people. It's a highly regarded practice that was always protected for those who were related to the head of the family, and I stress that at this time. There are some Bible scholars, some, not a whole lot, that strongly believe that the violation of this tradition by Jesus, as he invited his motley crew of 12 disciples from all different walks of life to the Passover supper, he, in 12 counts, violated this rule. You can't have people at the Passover dinner that aren't blood kin. Not just one person, he had 12 of them there. And they believe so strongly in the defense of this rule and this tradition that this may have been the core motivation for the Sanhedrin Council to finally move against Jesus, to demand his death from the Roman government, and demand, you see, they charged him with blasphemy. But this is maybe a higher level of violation. It's on the high holy day of Passover, and he has violated the table fellowship rule 12 times. Now you understand that blasphemy didn't hold up to Pontius Pilate. He's a polytheist. He believes in multiple gods. Blasphemy means nothing to him. Absolutely nothing. And they changed the charge to treason, which is terrible among all government levels. Now you got his attention. Treason will get Pilate's attention, but blasphemy doesn't. That's a religious matter. Go take care of it yourself. Oh, but we want to kill him. No, you can't do that without my permission, and I'm not going to give it. So you see how they changed the charge so they would get the outcome that they desired, but there's a possibility, at least a contributing factor, I'll call it that, at least a contributing factor, that because Jesus violated table fellowship, just made them hopping mad. They just could not take one more thing from this itinerant rabbi from Nazareth. Who does he think he is? We've practiced the Passover feast exactly like this, according to the rules, for centuries. Who does he think he is to step in here and change the rules in blatant fashion? Why would I bring up such a point about this ancient tradition? It's a tradition. It's not in the law of Moses. It's a tradition concerning the restriction of the Passover table. The Apostle Paul reflects this teaching, I believe, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, as he instructs us to examine ourselves, as I mentioned before, and this is his quote, discern the Lord's body. Discern the Lord's body. That's a spiritual function. Discernment is not a judgment. It's a determination. And it's spiritually fueled. Discern the Lord's body before you participate in the bread and the cup. Not to see if John and Susie and Jimbo are in the body, but to discern if you are in the body. And stop right there. Stop right there. Because there were those who were saying, well, he's not living right, and we shouldn't let him have communion. That's not your focus and concern. Your concern is discerning the body of Christ, and if you are in it. And he clearly says that. I believe, it seems that Jesus actually regarded the rule, that he didn't blatantly violate it 12 times with 12 different people. He regarded the rule and invited who he considered to be blood kin relationship to the table fellowship celebration. Ooh, does that change things? The disciples were invited to share in this special dinner, this special time, because of a blood relationship to Jesus Christ. He followed the rule. He followed the rule in a different way, not in the natural, not in the flesh, not in the DNA connection, but in a spiritual matter. He considered these 12 men connected to him. That's why they got invited. This isn't the CEO and the board of directors of the new church that's forming. This is a blood-bought relationship between these men. Today we are regarded as the children of God, related in the Spirit by blood. By the blood of Jesus Christ. Not because we have common ancestry, not because we share DNA, not because we're all created in the image of God. No. It's because we are connected to Jesus Christ by a blood relationship that was shed for many. And that's a scriptural phrase. The blood was shed for many, and it included us by His grace and purpose. As a result of this bond, this special bond and this relationship, you and I, as believers in Jesus Christ, dependent totally upon Him for our salvation, not by works, not by heritage, not by DNA structure, not by our background, but by our faith in His promise and in His sacrifice for us. As a result of that, we are invited to sit at the communion supper to remember and to honor Jesus Christ. God bless you tonight. I trust that you will participate for that reason the next time communion is available to you. And whether anybody else understands it or not, let me tell you, table fellowship still is the rule. You got to be connected to the head of the family by blood. And by God's grace, we are. God bless you tonight. Thank you for watching.
This program has been produced by Lives Devoted to Ministries, home of training trainers to lead. We hope you enjoyed this program. For more information on how to contact us and to view other teachings, you can visit ldtms.org. We are a faith-based ministry and welcome your support so you too can be a part of training trainers to lead.